1960s was a memorable time for Dodge. It was really the golden age for the American muscle car, if you will. And Dodge was on the cutting edge of performance, styling, and engineering. When the decade came to a close, the 1970 Dodge Challenger was born. The nearly 77,000 Challengers that were made that year, only 137 Challengers RT were equipped with the 426 Hemi motor and a 4-speed transmission. Ours is a restored example of one that not only survived all these years, but that's been in the family since day one. My name is Juan Escalante and I drive a 1970 Dodge Hemi Challenger RT. The summer of 1969, we found ourselves in Detroit. It was an exciting time for my father, of course, but for the whole family. Visit to the Detroit Auto Show and seeing the Challenger, he just fell in love with it. A few days later, he visited his local dealership and ordered the car of his dreams. The car had to be orange, black interior, 4-speed transmission, and the biggest motor that Chrysler was offering at the time, which was the 426 Hemi. From 1972 until 1996, the car remained in Venezuela. Word had preceded the car that a Hemi Challenger was to arrive in Venezuela, and this was amongst the motorheads and car enthusiasts. Many of them curious just to see a Hemi Challenger. Not one had arrived in Venezuela. So the car arrived and they immediately started referring to the car as El Hemi. The first few years, the car worked just fine. Late 70s, the car started having some issues with maintenance because my father just couldn't find the parts. So he decided to park it. The car, of course, deteriorated a bit. And in 1996, my brother Gus and I sat down and asked Dad to basically pass the baton and let us have it, which we was happy to let us bring it back to the States and have it restored. It spent 24 years in Venezuela before we had the car brought back to the States. So we bring the car back in 1996 and we start gathering parts, not an easy task. And in 2005, we gave life to El Hemi. Dad passed on in the middle of the restoration. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. 4 months after that, he was gone. We had to gather ourselves and really think about how we were going to use the car. And one of the things that he always stressed on was that the car was used, that we would enjoy the car on the streets, on the highways, that we would give rides to our kids and to our friends and let them experience that. And that's exactly what we've done. My youngest nephew never met him, but he knows his grandfather through the car. It's a way of connecting those who have come before us to those who will be coming in the future.
Every year on my birthday, from the time that I was born, we've taken a picture with this car. For me, it's pretty neat to see not only how I've grown, but how the car has come along and see the progress that it's made. That's pretty neat for me to take a look back at those pictures.
The most fulfilling part of being the actual caretaker of the car has been that I have taken what Grandpa started, who was born in Venezuela. And from an early age, he was just mesmerized by the automobile. All he bought throughout the years were Chrysler products. He was a taxi driver for most of his life. So he had to make sure that all his cars worked or he wasn't making any money. To my dad, who purchased the car, to myself and my brother Gus, who restored the car, for the generations after us so that they can make that connection. It's the closest thing to a time machine. The reason why is every time I get in the car, I put my two hands on the steering wheel. I close my eyes and I take in the smell. I start thinking of when I was 5 years old and I was riding in the back seat, or when I graduated to the front seat, my dad was buckling me up for a highway run, or when I was a teenager and I was working right alongside him under the hood. Being able to hear the rumble, it's a way to connect to that era. That's how the cars sounded back then. I sometimes just play the Super 8 cassette, the Abraxas from Santana, and just listening to that takes me back to that era for sure. That's magic. It's all visceral. It helps us answer the question of why we still have it. It's a wonderful way of showing the future generations about their heritage and their past.
As long as there's Escalantes, this car is going to remain in the Escalante family. I can promise you that. I know I speak for my dad that this thing is never going to be sold. This thing means way too much. When my grandfather passed in the middle of the restoration, it was sad, but to be able to go into the garage and see this car, I know that he's right there with me every time I step inside of it.
You know, a lot of people say, you can buy a nice apartment in Miami with that, or put that money in investments, and it's pointless. We have something that for us is zero value. You know, in the balance sheet, it's zero value, but the emotional part, all that adds up to a lot of money, a lot of stories.